Hello and welcome back to another video. In this video I'm going to be talking about my experience of dystonia, and I'll explain in future videos more about what dystonia is, but in this video I'm just going to be talking about how I experienced it, especially at the start when I first got sick and what that looked like. In one of my previous videos I spoke about how I was having a lot of seizures and seizure-like activity mixed in with dystonia towards the end of 2022. Around this time, my memory was getting a lot worse. I've always had incredible memory and I've been very known for it because of my autism. I remember everything all the time, like as if it's happening in front of me. My memory is like a video recorder, and when I remember something, the only way I can describe it is it feels like I'm watching that memory at the front of my mind, the front of my forehead. So when I remember something, I'm watching it like a movie. But something very strange happened when I got sick. I started having very severe memory problems. I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember things that I told people. I was forgetting everyday things. I didn't even know what a table was. I didn't know what a fork was. I would look at a fork and I would have to think really hard what this item is. I didn't know what it was, and eventually the word fork came to me, or I'd look at a table, but I couldn't because I couldn't remember what the word for table was. It had very strange memory issues, and this only got a lot worse very rapidly in the new year. My handwriting was changing a lot at the time. It was getting worse. Some days it was really tiny and very squished together. Other days it was all over the place. It was very strange. Handwriting now, almost 4 years later, is still very badly affected, and it's got a lot worse when I eat foods high in histamine. Towards the end of 2022, my dystonia was getting a lot worse. I was still having these seizure-like events mixed in with dystonia, but the dystonia was becoming a lot worse by itself. I would have episodes of dystonia more than I would have episodes of seizures, or the seizure dystonic episodes. In that episode, the dystonia would be more than the seizure-like activity. So I'd have seizure-like activity for some of the time, but for the vast majority of the time that I was in these episodes, my body was stuck in very unusual positions for very prolonged periods of time, several hours. And it was extremely painful. I'll briefly explain now what dystonia is, but I'm going to make a future video on this later. Dystonia is a neurological condition, and it presents differently in everyone who has it. Not everyone with dystonia will have the same presentation, but essentially the muscles will involuntarily contract in someone's body, and this can be any part of their body. For me personally, I've always experienced quite severe dystonia in my wrists, in my hands, my fingers, in my arms, in my legs, in my throat, where it affects my neck. It affected my vocal cords and in my face. So for me, the dystonia has been quite bad in different areas of my body, but for me it's not permanent. I'm not permanently contorted and twisted into uncomfortable positions. The dystonia can be extremely painful, and it has been in my case, especially at the start. It's classed as a movement disorder. Some people will have uncontrollable movements or blinking eyes, whereas other people, like myself, usually my muscles will get twisted and contorted into very uncomfortable and unusual positions, such as my neck going to my shoulder, or my arms being twisted behind me, or my feet will be turned inwards. I'm going to make a different video about it another time. At the time, I think a lot of what I was experiencing was actually dystonia attacks and dystonia episodes, but we were confusing them with seizures because I was having a lot of seizures also, and because the seizure-like activity was happening in and amongst the dystonia attacks. It was quite difficult to differentiate between what was the seizure-like activity and what was the dystonia. But for me, I'm very aware of what parts were the dystonia and what weren't. These seizure dystonia episodes continued until the December of 2022 into January of 2023. They got a lot better in comparison to the start. The first month or 6 weeks or so was extremely bad, but they got a lot less towards the end of the year. But the strange or unusual thing for me is that the dystonia episodes and seizure-like activity was massively triggered by food. It was massively triggered by eating. And towards the start of January 2023, it was almost exclusively triggered by eating. In my symptom and seizure diary, I had written repeatedly in every single entry that I had just eaten before my symptoms started. And that goes for both the seizures and the dystonia. I was getting hardly any sleep at all towards the end of 2022 and into 2023. Some nights I was sleeping only 2 hours, and other times I was writing that I'd only slept for 30 minutes. I have no idea how I was functioning. I was very, very exhausted all of the time, and I think I was becoming quite delirious, in all honesty, with the lack of sleep. My mental health at the time, in the January of 2023, was worsening rapidly. I was stuck in a psychiatric hospital where I was meant to have been discharged 6 months prior. I had no hope of seeing how I was going to leave the hospital given my physical health. I was not meant to be in the psychiatric hospital. My symptoms were not because of my mental health, but no one knew what was going on, and I couldn't leave. I was distressed because of a lot of issues going on in my care at the time, and there was a lot of uncertainty in my life in general. I had no idea where I was going to be living once I left, and I had no idea what my future was going to look like. I had no routine whatsoever because of the way my health was. I had to stop going to all of my usual activities that I was doing before I got sick. So I had to stop all of my exercise classes, I had to stop going to the gym, I had to stop going on my walks, I had to stop going to my activities, I had to stop going to my groups. I became pretty much housebound within the hospital despite being an informal patient. In the UK, not being sectioned means that you are not legally detained in the hospital. So my mental health was worsening because as an autistic person, I can't function without routine. I stopped operating. I don't know how to do life without routine. And I was trapped. Essentially, I felt very trapped in the psychiatric hospital I was in through no fault of my own or anybody else's. But because of the way my physical health was, it was pretty much impossible for me to engage in anything I was doing before, especially things that were outside of the unit. At this point, I had pretty much gone into a mental health crisis. In January, the dystonia was getting a lot worse. I would eat and then I would have a dystonia episode, or I might have a very, very short seizure followed by a very severe dystonia episode. And it was excruciating. After the episodes, I wouldn't be able to talk. I would lose my speech, or my speech would become slurred. It was hard to think. I couldn't walk. I'd be walking on my tiptoes. I had a lot of muscle weakness and it was difficult to walk. So I could barely walk, I could barely talk, I could barely think. I would have a massive headache. I was also very, very confused after these episodes. I've written in my diary that I was very confused after almost every episode. I'll try to insert a little bit of footage now of 1 or 2 of the episodes that were occurring in the January of 2023 after eating food. You might not want to see it, so if you don't want to see the episode, then feel free to skip ahead. I'll explain briefly now what I'm going to be inserting. It's a very short footage of me in January 2023 lying on the floor with my arms and limbs twisted back in the air behind me. I'm unable to speak, move in my control, or communicate. I'm not having a seizure, although there were times that I would go in and out of seizures in and amongst the dystonia episodes, but for hours my muscles would be stiff and stuck and contracted in very, very unusual positions. This often meant for me that my arms were twisted in the air backwards behind me, my hands would be like claws, and I would be in excruciating amounts of pain. But you should be aware that the footage I insert is not representative of what my symptoms were looking like during this time every day, because my dystonia attacks and dystonia episodes got a lot worse than the footage that I'm inserting now. I don't have any footage of the worst of my symptoms because I was in excruciating amounts of pain. I wasn't thinking about anyone trying to film me during these episodes. I was just in pure survival mode. But on a 1 or 2 occasions, I did manage to ask someone to film it for the purpose of showing the doctors and the neurologists when I saw them in, at the time, 6 months' time. I had a neurology appointment in the May of 2023, and that's approximately 6 months later. So I wanted to have some evidence to show the neurologist what I was going through, because I thought it's going to be very difficult to describe to them what I mean without them seeing it themselves. And at the time, my symptoms were so rapidly changing, I had no idea what my health was going to look like in 6 months' time. So the only reason I have this tiny bit of footage was purely to show the neurologist. I do wish I had more footage, to be honest with you, and I do wish I had the footage of when I was at my worst in the dystonia attacks and episodes, purely because I don't think anyone would believe me if I would try to explain it to them. It's very difficult and hard to imagine what I mean without seeing it, because it's hard to imagine how somebody's body can be twisted and contorted in all different ways and shapes out of their control for many, many hours. These episodes were going on for approximately, on average, 3 to 4.5 hours every single time it happened, which meant that any time I ate anything for the next 4 to 5 hours, 3, 4, 5 hours, my limbs would be contorted and twisted backwards, and I had no control over it, and it was excruciatingly painful, and this would happen after I ate anything. So I'm going to insert the footage now. I know it might look strange, but it is what dystonia can do to people, and I'm posting this and talking about it to raise awareness, because before it happened to me, I had no idea what dystonia was. I had never heard of dystonia, but now that it's happened to me, I think more people should be aware of what it is, because it can happen to anyone at any time. For me, it happened to me after my COVID infection, and I was fit and healthy before this. I'd never experienced dystonia in my life before. But after getting COVID, dystonia and seizures have been my worst symptoms. I remember one particular episode, which I don't have footage of. It was towards the end of January, and I'd eaten some rice pouches. You know, those microwavable ones where you put them in the microwave and it quickly heats up the rice. I'd had 1 or 2 of those, and afterwards, within half an hour, I had a severe dystonia attack. This is where I would be in these episodes where I'd fall to the floor and my muscles would be twisted and stiff and stuck in very unusual positions for many, many hours. I was in excruciating amounts of pain. And I remember, because I could talk in these episodes, when I could get words out, I would say to the staff around me to call an ambulance, because I couldn't bear the pain any longer. We tried not to call an ambulance as much as we could, but the pain was excruciating and I honestly couldn't bear it any longer. So after 3.5 hours, an ambulance was called, and I was very grateful to these paramedics. They were treated me really well and they were very, very kind. And I remember hearing them say, when they walked in, they looked at me and they said, well, of course she's screaming in pain. She's been lying on the floor for 3.5 hours with her limbs twisted backwards. Of course she's screaming. They were very, very kind to me and very understanding, and I was extremely, extremely grateful for how well they treated me. Because I was at a psychiatric hospital at the time, and like I've said in previous videos, my experience of care from paramedics or A&E staff as a result of being in the psychiatric hospital alone meant that my care wasn't always very good, and I wasn't always treated with kindness or understanding or care. But on 1 or 2 occasions, I actually did have good experiences with the paramedics and the staff in A&E. I remember very clearly that they whisked me away in the ambulance to A&E, where I was given IV diazepam to try to help the muscles relax, anti-sickness, and IV paracetamol. The paracetamol did absolutely nothing. Paracetamol does not touch, in my case at least, the pain that I was going through with the dystonia attacks. But eventually the episode ended after many more hours later. At this point, my limbs had been contorted and my arms had been twisted backwards in the air for around 5 hours, I would say. And I was in excruciating amounts of pain, and I'd scream. I remember screaming so much in A&E because of the pain I was in. It's not a pain I can describe well, other than describing it as it feels like my entire body had turned to stone. All I kept saying was, it feels like my entire body has turned to stone. I kept screaming and saying, it feels like my limbs are going to be dislocated. It feels like my arm is going to be dislocated. It was really, really traumatic, and I still hear the sound of my own screams in my ears, and it's been 3 years since then. After the initial dystonia attack ended, when I was recovering in A&E, although my arms were no longer twisted in the air backwards behind me, my hands and my wrists were stuck like claws, and my arms were stuck out in front of me. And so I couldn't do anything. I couldn't take a drink, I couldn't get myself changed, I couldn't do anything. And I remember I had to have staff in the hospital help me go to the toilet because I was completely unable to, because of the way my limbs were. These dystonia episodes continue to happen almost every day from January onwards. They would happen exclusively after eating, and we didn't know why. But I remember writing down in my symptom diary, I've written, I had just eaten dinner beforehand, I had just eaten breakfast beforehand, I had just eaten lunch beforehand. Every single time an episode happened, it would be exclusively after eating. At the time, I was eating a plant-based whole food diet, which I didn't know at the time was very, very high in histamine, so this probably wasn't helping things. But I know now that histamine really impacts my symptoms, but I didn't know that at the time. Dystonia attacks were getting worse and worse, and they were affecting more of my body parts. So it was spreading to my abdomen and my stomach, and so I'd have extreme muscle contractions and muscle spasms in my stomach, and this would go on for many, many hours. And after these episodes, once the muscles eventually relaxed, it would trigger loads of diarrhea because the muscles in my stomach just suddenly relaxed, and I'd have to run to the toilet. And this was my life in January 2023. I barely ate anything for the next 3 weeks because I physically couldn't. Anytime I ate anything, I would have a severe dystonia attack where my arms would be twisted back behind me, my wrists would be twisted like claws, my fingers would be bent like claws, my shoulder felt like it was going to be dislocated, my speech would be affected, and my jaw felt like it was going to be dislocated, my speech would slur, and this happened every time I ate. And so for 3 weeks, I barely ate anything. I honestly thought at times I was going to die from low blood sugar. I thought I was going to die from the lack of nutrients that was in my body. I had already started to lose a little bit of weight unintentionally when I got sick after COVID because of the seizures that were happening and the amount of movement in my body that was occurring each day. But I didn't really have much weight left to lose. I did try to eat on 10 occasions during those 3 weeks. But when I say I tried to eat, I don't mean I tried to eat full meals. I had to try very small things like a spoonful of sweet corn or a cup of smoothie and 1 beetroot, and then I'd fall into a massive dystonia attack. Or I might have 2 or 3 rice cakes with tuna and I'd fall into a massive dystonia attack. So I pretty much didn't eat anything at all for 3 weeks, and I was in so much pain because of the amount of hunger I was feeling. I've never been so hungry in my entire life. It was a really dark time in my life. I couldn't eat anything. I was starving. I wish I could eat. I had lost so much weight. I had no energy. I couldn't walk. I was white as a ghost. I looked extremely sick. And there wasn't anything anyone could do. At the start, they were happening around 40 minutes after eating. And then very quickly it changed to 30 minutes after eating, and then 20 minutes, and then it would change exactly 10 minutes after eating anything. I would have a severe dystonia attack, and this would happen exactly 10 minutes after eating anything. My symptoms were very strange, and no one knew what was going on, and every time we tried to seek help from the GP or A&E, we were repeatedly told that I had to wait until my neurology appointment in the May of 2023, 6 months later. I don't think I was going to last until May 2023 at the time. I was so ill, I had lost loads of weight, I wasn't eating, and I just felt like I was going to die. And I had no idea how I was going to stay alive until my neurology appointment. The GP said they'd never seen anything like it before, so that they couldn't do anything to help me. The A&E staff, they said they've not seen anything like it before, and so they couldn't do anything to help me. And on one occasion, I had a doctor in A&E directly tell me not to return to A&E because they said they do not have any neurologists and so they cannot help me. I will insert some footage now of the dystonia attacks that I do have on camera, and these were in the January of 2023 and February of 2023, during those 3 weeks that I couldn't eat anything. They're not very pleasant to watch, and so you might want to fast forward and skip ahead. In that case, feel free to do that, that's fine. But if someone wanted to see them, I'll just describe that it looks like me lying in bed with my arms in the air twisted backwards, and my wrist twisted backwards, and my fingers like claws, and my speech is slurred, and my face is pulled to the side, and so my voice has changed. And I'm saying how much pain I'm in, and how I've not eaten in 3 weeks. The footage that I'm going to post, they are the dystonia attacks that I have on camera, but they are just 10 minutes into a dystonia attack. They are not 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 or 6 hours into the attack. The attack got much worse, where my limbs would be even more contorted and I'd be screaming for hours on end for it to stop because the pain was excruciating. It just felt like my entire body had turned to stone. It felt like my limbs were going to be dislocated, and I can still hear the sound of my own screams in my ears. I can still hear it now, and it's been 3 years. I've been severely traumatised by what I went through 3 years ago. To be honest with you, even if I did have the footage of what I was looking like 2, 3, 4 hours into the dystonia attack, I don't think I'd be able to post it because I think it would be too graphic and too distressing. And so I guess it doesn't really matter in that sense. But I do wish I had the footage for my own self to see. I do wish I had that footage to see, and I do wish I had that footage to be able to show neurologists that I see in the future, because it's very difficult to describe to someone what that can look like without seeing it yourself.
My arms and my everything. This is happened after less than 10 minutes of having half a cup of pea protein with water. That's it. I've barely eaten in 2.5 weeks. I can't do it anymore. My arms are twisted, my muscles are so stiff. It feels like everything is going to be dislocated. I can't bear it.
At this point, I knew with certainty that food was making me sick. I had been theorising it for several months because I'd been writing it in my symptom diary that I had eaten just before my seizures and dystonia attacks. But this time I knew for sure food exclusively was making me sick because the seizures had stopped, but the dystonia attacks had continued, and they were happening exactly 10 minutes after eating anything. It didn't matter what I ate. It could have been cucumber, it could have been sweet corn, it could have been spinach, it could have been fruit juice. It didn't matter anything I ate, I would have these dystonia attacks. The only thing that my body tolerated was lemon water and Lucozade, pure glucose essentially. That was the only thing my body tolerated in those 3 weeks. I was living off pure Lucozade and nothing else, with a lot of muscle relaxant medications, trying to see what would help me to stop this reaction. And it's been over 3 years and I still can't look at Lucozade. I feel so sick to my stomach every time I see a bottle of Lucozade in the shop because it's all I survived off for those 3 weeks. And prior to all of this happening, I never even drank Lucozade. I remember saying that whilst I was having it when I was ill, that I never even drank it before I got sick, and now I had no choice but to survive off it. I have no idea why Lucozade didn't make me have these reactions, but I imagine because it's sugar, I don't know why, because I guess Lucozade does have chemicals in it as well. But for whatever reason, I survived with nothing but Lucozade and a huge amount of medication in my stomach, and I felt extremely ill because lots and lots of medication with no food and just bottles and bottles of Lucozade to keep you going for 3 weeks will make you feel very ill. Understandably, at this time, I started having a huge phobia of food. I was so frightened to eat anything because everything was making me sick. This wasn't an eating disorder. I had had extensive history of anorexia in the past, and so I was used to not eating or not eating enough. But this was different. This was not eating anything for 3 weeks. This was out of my control. This was not a choice. I didn't have a fear of gaining weight. I didn't want to lose weight. That wasn't even in my thoughts at all. But I couldn't physically eat because I was having these severe dystonia attacks. And so it wasn't worth it. Anytime I ate even a spoonful of sweet corn, I would be on the floor for 4 hours with my arms twisted in the air. So it was literally impossible to eat anything. In addition to this, I got sectioned around this time. I had gone into a mental health crisis, and in addition to this, there were some staff who thought that this was something to do with an eating disorder, even though I repeatedly disputed this, and even though I repeatedly begged everyone that I wanted to eat, and how desperate I was to eat, and how hungry I was, and how much I wanted to eat. Over and over again, I told everybody this, and yet still, despite me saying this, and despite people could see, because I was in a psychiatric hospital, there were people there watching me eat lettuce, watching me eat sweet corn, watching me eat tuna, and then immediately have these severe dystonia reactions. So they couldn't deny it themselves that food wasn't making me sick, but for some reason, there were some people, not everybody, but there were some people who were still accusing me of having an eating disorder. And this also meant that I was sectioned, partly for this reason as well. I remember on my section papers, the doctor wrote that they were sectioning me because of my anorexia, in addition to my mental health crisis. And I remember being really cross at this, because I remember thinking, this isn't anorexia, this isn't an eating disorder, I want to eat. I just can't. I'm scared of food, but not because I'm scared of gaining weight, but because I'm scared of having a severe dystonia reaction. And that, in my head at least, that is a very understandable fear to have, given how ill I was when I ate anything. I was trialled on various different medications, such as benzodiazepines to try to help the muscles relax. That didn't do anything. I was given a different medication, which made me a lot worse. It made my blood pressure drop, and I felt extremely, extremely ill. And so I had to come off that medication very quickly. I was then given another muscle relaxant medication, baclofen, and that initially didn't do anything too much to help. It was still continuing. And so we were at a loss of what to do. I really feel for the staff and my doctors who were working with me at the time in the psychiatric hospital, because this wasn't a psychiatric issue, and yet they were responsible to try to figure out how they could help me and what medication they could give me that would mean that I could eat something safely without having a reaction. The A&E staff couldn't do anything. The doctors in the GP surgery couldn't do anything. We tried to get the neurology appointment to be brought forward, but they said they couldn't do that because there were no appointments. And so we were at a loss of what to do. And I feel really bad for the staff. They were under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure in many ways, but also with my health. And we were in crisis. If I didn't get any food in me very, very quickly, I don't know what was going to happen to me. I think I probably would have died, in all honesty, because I just couldn't eat, and I'd lost so much weight, and my blood sugar was extremely, extremely low, and I was taking a lot of medication on an empty stomach. I think that's all I'm going to say in this video. It's quite a long video, maybe, I don't know. I'll see what it's like when I edit it. But I guess this is my first video on dystonia and my experience of dystonia. My dystonia now has changed a lot in presentation. It's been almost 4 years since I got sick, so my symptoms have changed and progressed a lot. But I'm very grateful that my symptoms are not as bad as they were when I first got sick. They're still all there, but the severity is less. And I'll talk a bit about that in future videos as to the things I've done to try to temporarily lessen them. I feel like I'm going to have a seizure now because my speech has changed and my face is pulling to the side. I don't feel that well, but I'll end the video here and I will see you in another video. Bye.